That Friday, Tom Jackson, the former police chief of Ferguson, blew me off. And so we rescheduled him for next Friday, and then on the break, he comes walking in the studio. So I blew you off, you blew me off, but we are glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. A mix-up in scheduling happens all the time, but thanks for coming in.
I'm glad to be here, and I apologize for that.
You got it. No problem. The book is called Policing Ferguson, Policing America. A brand new book out. Tom Jackson, former police chief of Ferguson. It was August 9th, 2014, so we're coming up on the third anniversary of the Michael Brown, Darren Wilson shooting.
Correct. August 9th, yeah.
You stayed through March of the following year and then resigned as police chief.
That's correct.
Okay. And so now you've written the book. We'll get to the book in a second. Just back from New York and an appearance on The View in which it sounded like you were there to listen to Whoopi Goldberg for an hour yell at you.
Yeah, I think the show should be retitled Their View. It's vacuous at best, as my son put it. But
what happened?
One woman told me that she was embedded in Ferguson before the riots started. Now, the shooting happened on August 9th. The riots started on August 10th.
Right.
So I can only assume that she was a clairvoyant.
Right.
And she got in there ahead of time.
She told you on the air that she was embedded before?
Before the riots, yes.
Before the riots.
She said that.
Okay. And, of course, but, I mean, they didn't even let you talk, right? They just yelled at you for an hour.
Right, yeah. They had me there to tell me their view.
Right.
I think.
Yeah. There
was one young lady there to my left who was taking up my cause, on part of the book, which was nice.
Yeah. What about off the air? Did they come up to you and say, "Sorry to hear"? What was it like off the air in the green room?
No, it was off the air. For example, the leader there, Joy Behar, was in the back dressing room with us, the makeup room, and didn't raise her head.
Nothing. What about afterwards? Did they say thanks for coming in? Have a safe flight home?
On the air, thanks for being here. But then
that was it.
That was it.
All right.
The production staff was nice.
Okay. Well, that's nice. At least the production staff was nice.
They were great.
So many things to get to. So many things to talk about. And I want to get to the book, but there's a couple of questions I have for you, and that is, I want to talk about Anthony Gray, because for the whole time during Ferguson, Anthony Gray was the lawyer for the family.
Right.
But he was also the police chief at Pine Lawn, which is the next town over. So while he was going on national television decrying the police tactics and the police brutality of North County, he himself was a police chief.
That's correct, yeah.
Why wasn't that a bigger story?
You're going to have to ask your colleagues, in the real media out there, because that just wasn't an issue. There was a narrative out there that was getting print, getting time on the air.
Right.
Nobody had to do any work. All they had to do was go out on the street and talk to some.
Did you have a working relationship with him before this as police chiefs of neighboring communities?
I didn't know the man.
You didn't even know the man?
No.
And the town was right next door to you?
Town over there.
Yeah. Also, Darren, another part of the story that didn't get any attention, which I brought up numerous times and was shot down, whatever else. And that day, Darren Wilson, before the fatal incident, he went on a call to help an infant.
It was actually, I think she was a toddler. It was a sick case.
Right.
And he went there and provided assistance as he should. And,
right.
Then he was just on his way to lunch, actually.
Right. He was on his way to lunch and then got this call, put off lunch to go help the kid in need, right?
Yes.
And then on his way back from this call, that's what he was doing in the neighborhood in the first place, right?
That's why he was there.
Yeah, and then came across Michael Brown, and everyone else knows the rest of the story. Yep. In the book, Policing Ferguson, Policing America, you say mistakes did happen, and that if you could do it again, you would do things differently. Talk about that for a moment.
Sure. Well, one of the things that really set people off was the fact that Michael Brown's body was in the street for a long period of time. And I tried to explain there were reasons for that. First of all, there's protocols. When you have an officer-involved shooting, you only get one chance at that scene to process and make sure it's right.
Right.
You don't take your time and get it right. You're criticized for whatever.
Right.
You take too long.
Because you only get one shot at this.
Exactly.
You don't get a do-over. You don't say, all right, you know what? We move the body. Okay, put it back. Let's just leave it where it is. Once you touch the body, you're then altering evidence.
Right. You're in.
Yeah.
You're all in there. So one of the things was there's one CSI unit on duty at the time.
Right.
And they were at the south end of the county. So that was a 45-minute wait there. Nobody's fault. That's just what happened.
That's because that hospital, there was a break-in in a hospital,
yeah,
right?
It was a hostage situation.
Yeah, and that would have been a much bigger story if, in fact, Ferguson didn't happen.
It absolutely would have, and as the case was, it barely made any fuss at all.
So they were down South County working on that when they get the call, and so they had to finish what they were doing there before they came back up to Ferguson.
Right.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was a scene that was waiting to be processed. So, and the other thing was that there was gunfire breaking out behind us, right by where the body lay. So it became an insecure scene. So there's the matter of securing the scene before it can be processed.
Right.
So all those factors went into the length of time that the body was there. But in spite of that, there was a law professor from St. Louis University. I hesitate to call him that. Who said in front of a crowd I was addressing at Harvard University that I left the body in the street, me personally, left the body in the street to intimidate other people. I mean, as horrible a thing as that is to say,
right?
He said it in front of people.
Was the body covered up in a sheet at all? On TV, we see it covered up in a sheet. Could you do that? Was that, how does that work?
Yeah, that was an emergency blanket that one of the officers placed over the body, and then as they started to process, they put up the barriers,
right?
The blinders, as they are,
right?
And of course, people approached me right there on the scene and said we were doing that so we could plant a gun.
Right. Yeah.
There was no win.
Yeah. Right. And then if you move the body or anything else, then all of a sudden it's you change the direction of the bullet. It was this. It was that.
Yeah.
You did say in the book, Policing Ferguson, Policing America, that you wish to try and keep the peace. Did you use too much force or show too much force?
Well, consider this. In the entire time that unrest was going on, riots, almost daily basis, in spite of them being called peaceful protests,
right.
Law enforcement did not injure a single protester.
Right.
I mean, think about that. With all the talk about, the police wanting to commit violence against minorities and things like that, well, if we wanted to, there was a perfect opportunity because they were shooting at us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That day, though, you mentioned the dogs. You wish you didn't call out the dogs, or did you need the dogs to help keep the peace?
Well, at the time when the additional canines were called, keep in mind, our guy Greg Kaysen was there with his canine, which was well known to the residents of Ferguson, and just sitting there, and he's talking to the crowd, and people are petting the dog, and so additional canine were called, thinking that would be an effective way just to keep the scene secure.
Right.
Well, the way it looked, it's when I talk about optics in the book. It's not necessarily the way things are. The dogs weren't brought there to attack anybody, but it looked like that.
Right.
To some people, and they played on that. And talked about Selma.
Would you have done that differently if you could? Not that it was necessarily your call at that moment, because you're managing chaos at this point.
Yeah.
On second thought, would it have been better to keep the dogs away?
I think in retrospect maybe, but it's hard to make that call. You can't, should have, but the optics that we could control that look bad.
Right.
I would look into that differently now.
Tom Jackson, our guest, former police chief of Ferguson, Missouri. His new book out, Policing Ferguson, Policing Ferguson, Policing America. We got this call a lot on the show, and I agree with it. And thought it was a big point, but also at the same time, it didn't make any sense to me, and who cared? But the argument was that the protesters weren't from St. Louis, as if it matters when your house is burning down. Zisser Tire didn't care that the person who lit the fire was from California as opposed to Ferguson. But any evidence that the protesters, it was a grassroots from around the world and it became a flashpoint and we here had no control over this?
Yeah, there is. If we have a map of the U.S. that shows the Twitter feed going out with the hashtag Ferguson,
right?
And it just blew up across the country,
right?
So it was kind of a rallying cry, because people believed the hands up, don't shoot thing,
right?
we got to start with that. And if you believe that that happened, that's a horrible thing.
Right.
And people are going to speak out in the loudest terms. And so people around the country, for whatever reason, believed that happened.
Right.
And they started coming in from everywhere. And then, of course, there was funding from the outside. We actually had a couple of protesters come to the police station asking where they should clock in.
No, you did. No, hold on. You had protesters looking to check in at the police station.
Correct.
How many?
You can't make that stuff. There was only 2 that I saw.
Right.
But most of them knew to go to one of the churches that was, housing and organizing.
Right, yeah. So it was a proxy war. It was a proxy fight. It was, how many people were in Ferguson were so upset with the terrible police that they took to the streets?
Well, they weren't Ferguson residents for the most part. I mean, if Ferguson residents were being treated as badly as they said,
right,
then I would have thought Lacey Clay would have said something to me,
right,
or Maria Donnell Chappelle,
right,
or somebody,
right.
And that never happened.
Yeah.
They came to our 4th of July parade and marched and shook hands with citizens, but nobody commented to me about
right,
the oppressive policing.
Yeah. You held news conferences every day.
Yeah.
You tried to get the word out. You tried to get the answers out. Why was it just that the media not report it? Did the people not want to hear it? Looking back, tell me about the whole messaging of it.
Yeah, so I think the big part of it was people weren't asking questions. There were a few reporters who would say, what happens next? What are you going to do? How do you manage this? Why are you doing this? But most of them were coming with an agenda that started out with your racist police department, or how could you not know that all this bad stuff was going on?
Right.
So they started with the premise that you're bad,
mm-hmm,
or we're bad,
right,
and then asked the questions from there.
Yeah, I would say MSNBC probably was the biggest culprit of that. They came ground, swooped in, helicoptered in, and all of a sudden they were experts on St. Louis in about 5 minutes.
Didn't take long.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I've been working here 20 years and I barely know St. Louis.
Right.
Thomas Jackson, our guest. A lot more to get to. The book is called Policing Ferguson, Policing America, What Really Happened and What the Country Can Learn from It. Tom Jackson, former police chief of Ferguson. The book, bookstores everywhere. Do you have any book signings anywhere coming up?
Not coming up. Nothing scheduled.
But Amazon.com, bookstores everywhere. It'll be out there. Tom Jackson, more on the Big 550 KTR. Policing America. Let's get to here in Missouri. And at some point, it seemed like Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, it was you and the Ferguson police against the world. It seemed like the state and the feds wanted no part of policing Ferguson those first 3 or 4 nights.
Well, we had officers come in from all over the area, including the county,
mm-hmm,
and the state, and but you're talking about on the political level.
Yeah,
we were, they.
I'm talking about specifically Governor Nixon.
Yeah, threw us under the bus so quickly. All of them did. The governor, Claire McCaskill. It was just it was surprising, it was shocking to me how quickly they threw us under the bus and took sides against us.
What did Governor Nixon do or not do in those first couple of days?
Well, he tried to placate instead of arrest.
Mm-hmm.
So we were doing good those first 3 days. We were making a lot of arrests, and we were making headway in bringing this down. If you keep arresting people, eventually they're gonna not want to come back.
Right.
And that's what we were doing.
Right.
Until he changed the tactics.
You were arresting people who were trying to burn down stores, trying to walk in the middle of the street, trying to violence, guns, whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
They were making all kinds of arrests.
And you got a call from him to say what? Stop doing that?
No,
or
he quit talking to me pretty early on. I had a couple of meetings with him, and then he just he quit talking to the city of Ferguson at all, to the point where on the night of the grand jury decision, Bob McCullough's grand jury, we were supposed to have National Guard just standing up on various points throughout the city, as a force multiplier to let the police officers enforce the law.
Right.
And I was told that we'd have plenty there. And then at the last minute, I was told they weren't coming.
Right.
And I wasn't given a reason. But, so when the riot started that night, our mayor and city manager and people from the city were just trying to reach out to the governor, say, please send him in.
Right.
So give us some more people.
Yeah.
And he absolutely would not respond at all.
Yeah. We had the mayor on, Mayor Knowles on, and I asked him, what conversations did you have with the governor? And he said he never spoke to the governor. Never had a one-on-one conversation with the governor. When they took over the police and had the highway patrol come in, and the famous question he was asked, who's in control, and never gave an answer.
I love that.
What was going through your mind? What was going through the morale? Explain to me your mindset as you're watching this, where you are.
What, watching him give his answer?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Let me set that up. The question was, you've declared a state of emergency. Does the buck stop with you?
Right.
Now, this is Missouri, where Harry Truman, famously coined that phrase, the buck stops here. And he could not answer that question. He hemmed and hawed and, went off on tangents. So the reporter re-asked the question, does the buck stop with you?
Right. Who's in charge?
Yeah.
Right.
He still could not answer that question.
Yeah.
And it was just an example of failed leadership.
Yeah. There was also the night of the Bob McCullough grand jury, the week of Thanksgiving, which was probably the worst night of all the worst nights.
Yeah.
But there were also stories in the first go-around where there were supposed to be National Guards people there standing at the Ferguson market and then would leave. So they were there, and then they would leave. Was that a directive from the governor, from the highway patrol, from you? What was going on? They would show up, and then they would leave.
Nobody really knew because, you look at those National Guards personnel. Now, most of them are, combat veterans. They've been to Iraq and Afghanistan and stuff. And they wanted to be there. They wanted to help the community, against this basic insurgency.
Right, yeah.
So we don't know who was telling them what to do, but originally when we had asked the governor, and this is when I was still having meetings with him, would we have National Guard? And he said, no, we're going to handle this all in blue, meaning just with police.
Right.
Then he changed, and we were going to have the National Guard, and then he changed back. So there was no consistency, and that was one of the problems that all the officers had, and the command, all through the ranks is what's the plan?
What's going on? Right.
What are the rules of engagement here?
It seemed like they would send you out, and you would be in charge. You would talk. And then there were people in Jefferson City who were trying to direct you but not talking to you. So you were the point man and a deer in the headlights in that you couldn't say anything bad about the governor, but you didn't know what was going on. And so all of this was going on while you were trying to answer all these questions.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate description?
That's it in a nutshell.
You mentioned Claire McCaskill. What did Claire McCaskill do or not do?
Well, she's the one that started that whole militarized police thing. And said that the police behavior was despicable or something like that.
Right.
She was very, very critical of law enforcement very early on, and she later apologized privately to Chief Belmer, but wouldn't do it publicly. But those vehicles that the SWAT teams had are designed for rescue. And for getting personnel into places safely. They were designed after the famous L.A. bank robbery, if you remember that, where the police were outgunned, and then Littleton, Colorado, where they needed to look into ways to rescue kids in a
hostage situation.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing all law enforcement was training for, is active shooter situations up until this happened.
Yeah.
So that's what those vehicles were designed for. They're not military vehicles; they're law enforcement vehicles.
When the feds came to town, and Eric Holder said what he said. Did that help the situation? Did that hurt the situation? Did it make it more volatile because now the protesters had somebody from the feds sort of, I don't want to say endorsing them, but placating that opinion?
He basically legitimized the unrest by coming in and without saying it, actually, essentially saying this was a bad shooting, and we're going to get justice. Mm-hmm. And so it's like pouring gasoline on flames.
Right.
Is what he did. So and in the end, he even said that even though the shooting was justified, the protesters were right.
Right. Yeah. Any ins? What's the one or two? I mean, you wrote the book, so it's all in here.
Yeah.
Policing Ferguson, Policing America. Tom Jackson, our guest. What in a perfect world? What should have happened, or what could have happened?
In a perfect world, this is a state and local event. We have an officer-involved shooting. There's only one person in the area that can say whether or not that was justified,
Right.
and that is the prosecuting attorney, Bob McCullough.
Right.
That was, so in a perfect world, you do the investigation, you process the scene, you report to the media and to the people what you know and what's going to happen from here, and then you wait. And then eventually, the prosecuting attorney makes his decision and reports it, and,
Right.
and people grieve and mourn
Yeah.
their loss.
Is North County, is the protesters or the people who complain about being over-ticketed, using their residents as ATM machines, these police departments that use that revenue to sort of fund their operations, do those people have a point when they say that?
It depends on where they are. Ferguson, for example, is a point-of-sale city. A lot of the cities in the area are pool cities.
Right.
So Ferguson was doing well. We had the Sam's and the Walmart and the
Right.
Home Depot and things like that. So, court reform is one of those things that needed to happen in some communities. So,
Right. Yeah.
there's always some good that's going to come out of it, I hope.
What did you learn from all of this?
Well, I put a lot of it in the book. What I learned about is the importance of staying ahead of social media when you're in the public eye.
Right.
I learned about optics. That people don't necessarily care about how something actually is. They care more about how it looks.
Right.
I learned that people in power tend to want to hang on to that power,
Right.
a lot of them, and will do anything to hold it.
How much of the people in power said one thing to you privately and went to the cameras and said something completely different?
A few.
Yeah.
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 There were a few.
Yeah. Wow. It was, from what my perch here, it broke my heart. From where you were, I can only imagine the angst you went through the whole thing.
It was devastating on a personal level.
Yeah. Because one, you have a police officer who's under your command going through this.
Right.
But you also have a family who lost a son.
Yes.
And so they're grieving, and their grief, you can argue, is being taken advantage of.
Very much so, yeah.
And you have an 18-year-old boy whose life is lost. So there are no winners in any of this.
No, it was absolutely no win situation.
Yeah. Tom Jackson, what are you doing now? Besides getting yelled at by Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, that was fun. No, I just finished up the book now. And
Yeah. When you go out and speak, and you come across people who have a different opinion than you or think of Ferguson as the other way, do you have a cordial conversation with you? Do they hear your side of the story? Are you changing minds? Are they looking at from a different perspective, at least?
I found that people that read the book before they interviewed me had a different perspective than they had going into it.
Right.
Because it is a different perspective.
Yeah.
But a lot of people just believe what they believe, and they're angry.
Yeah.
And they come at me that way.
What's interesting is Jonathan Capehart of the Washington Post wrote a mea culpa, saying, I was wrong about Ferguson. There haven't been a lot of people who have come out and said, I'm wrong on this.
No, there haven't.
But you've had Chicago, you've had Maryland, you've had other police shootings, Minnesota, and they all circle back to Ferguson. But again, Ferguson didn't happen the way it happened in some of these other communities.
Right.
It was a justifiably terrible shooting, but it was still justified.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom Jackson, the book is Policing Ferguson, Policing America. You're always welcome here. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
You got it.